Ed Catmull, thank you very much for coming to Berkeley to talk with us about open innovation and your career as both a scientist, a technologist, and a visionary business leader. We're thrilled to have you.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. I live fairly close, so
yeah,
this is considered home.
Great. Well, I hope Berkeley can become part of that home going forward. I wanted to start you back in your early days at the University of Utah, where they really created a wonderful hotspot for computer graphics back in the 1980s that I think really helped fuel some of the technology that you've done so brilliantly with since. Can you tell us a little bit about that time?
Well, it was this extraordinary time. It actually started before the 70s even.
Okay.
And I got there in 1970. ARPA was starting to make things happen. They wanted to have the scientists be able to talk with each other, and so they conceived of some way of talking, which they called the ARPANET. And the University of Utah was one of the first 4 nodes.
In the whole system?
In the whole system.
So what we think of today as the internet, back when there were only 4 nodes, one of them was the University of Utah.
Yes, and another one was Berkeley.
Yes.
Okay. And then it was Santa Cruz, and then SRI down at Stanford. So it was a really exciting time, and the originators of ARPA believed that graphics would be one of the ways of being able to use what was coming out of the computers, hence its importance to begin with. I grew up in Utah, and I was at graduate school there, and I took this first course in computer graphics 49 years ago, which Ivan Sutherland taught.
Yes.
His partner was Dave Evans, who was the chairman of the department, who came from Berkeley.
Right, and they were the founders of Evans and Sutherland.
That's right. And fortunately for us, they were off busy running their company, which meant that the graduate students were pretty free to discover. And to be honest, it felt like we were at an Easter egg hunt at the beginning of the line as they're about to cut it. I'd originally wanted to be in physics, but I realized that the frontier was a long ways away. So now in computer science, wow, we're at the frontier. Years ago, I'd wanted to be an animator, so here was a way of making art, but at the same time, it was using technology, and I really loved to program. And they were on this path of trying to figure out how to make pictures, which started off with line drawing, and then it was polygons. And then they're trying to make the polygons look smooth. So I took on the task of trying to bend polygons, but I realized that that wasn't the way to do it, so I pushed it aside, and it came up with a way of displaying the curved surfaces directly. And along the way, I had a side project, which was rejected by one of my professors, as a new way of generating a surface, which is today the surface that's used in making all the surfaces in special effects and animation. But that was not my thesis itself.
Well, this is marvelous, and this actually brings me to something I did want to ask you about, which was one of your major contributions has been this animation tool we call Renderman, which could have been the basis for a company by itself. And you could have had an animation tools company built around the power and capability of Renderman, but instead you took it a different direction and used it to tell these wonderful stories, and which became the basis of what we now know as Pixar. Can you talk about that capability and how you chose to develop it and which direction you took it?
Well, in graduate school, it was clear to me the potential was to make a feature animated film. And now, it wasn't the way films were made at the time. They were drawn by hand. But I could see that was there. But I could also list the reasons why it wasn't possible to do it at that time. So the list of impossible things was the list of what there was to work on. So I started chipping away at those. I was hired by George Lucas to bring technology into the film industry. Now, having come out of...
This was after his Star Wars success.
Yes, after I was working at a research lab in computer graphics back in New York for 5 years. During this period of time in 1977, Star Wars came out. And George had used what was the technology of the time, and the masters of it were the masters of optical and chemical processes for film. And the issue was, which is a physiological one, the way we perceive things, is you need to have motion blur when movies or when images move across the screen. I won't go into the technology for it, but it was an important issue.
For us to accept it as real.
Yeah, and it's normal motion pictures have it. Stop frame animation doesn't. Computer graphics is basically stop frame, and the old stop motion animation was that way, and it stood out. There was something wrong with it. So one of my research projects was to figure out how to put in the motion blur. And then in going to Lucasfilm, the state of the art was you could render around 40,000 polygons. So I, with two colleagues, Lauren Carpenter and Rob Cook, said, okay, we're going to reconceive how we make pictures, but we have to handle incredible complexity, incredible resolution. We have to solve motion blur. And so instead of having a goal of 40,000 polygons, we came up with a goal of 80 million little polygons. And the reason we picked a big number, I do not know, we didn't round this to 100 million, incidentally. Even like I said, why do we say 80? It was a number we calculated, but 80 million wasn't anywhere near possible as an extension of the way they did things. So we said,
You had to do something different.
yeah, it was going to force us to think about things in different ways. And we had two different approaches. I had one approach was to completely calculate what you would see on a screen. And the other approach that the other two took was sort of a random sampling. And I believed in the complete calculation. They believed in the other approach. But the underpinnings were the same. So that's what we were working on. Every week we met together, and we had this friendly competition every week trying to outdo each other. And then at one point, there was a breakthrough that Rob Cook made that blew past my solution. So this is one of those things, and I fondly remember it's like this friendly competition in which I didn't win, but I won. Because we made this incredible progress, and then we brought in others, like Pat Hanrahan, who developed this shading language. So all these are ways of advancing the way you make the imagery. But this is all in the context is we're trying to make an animated film. And we never lost sight of what we were trying to do. So when George hired me, it was to do computer graphics, but also digital audio and video editing. At the time, I thought that the studios, the other people were like the troglodytes, and they didn't understand any of this stuff. I would say today was probably not the right concept. The one is that they couldn't conceive of it, so it was irrelevant. It wasn't that they were conservative and rejected it. It was that it was utterly irrelevant. It wasn't even worth looking at because of what their problem was. So we were fortunate to have George Lucas as the one backing us. And then there came a time when George got a divorce. She got the money, he got the company, but he was now cash poor. So Steve Jobs came in and bought us out. And then we started off as a hardware company because the technology, software and hardware, were not ready to do a feature film.
Yeah.
So we did a detour, and George even told Steve, because Steve, in his mind, he's buying this company to produce hardware. All he knows is it's the best graphics group in the world and it's got to be worth something, but he didn't know what. So he buys this group. George said, Steve, you should know these guys are hell-bent on making an animated film. And we failed as a hardware company, right? It was a bust, it was difficult, it was hard on Steve. We started when Steve was had just come out of Apple. He originally tried to buy us, and we said no, because he wanted to turn us into what he later made Next. That's not what we wanted to do. After he formed Next, I ran into him, and it was actually during that time. It's a separate story, but it was the Bill Joy, Steve Jobs anecdote, which is funny, but it's a detour. Ran into Steve again, and this time he bought us out from Lucasfilm on the terms that we wanted, except that we were still selling hardware. But I remember that as we closed that deal, he put his arms around me and Alvy Ray Smith, the other co-founder of the company, and he said, whatever happens, we have to be loyal to each other. So, and knowing what he just came through, say, well, okay, that was the emotional impact.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, through all the failures and the difficulty and the amount of money poured in, he was loyal to us. And in those early days, he was difficult to deal with. Right, so everything you hear about Steve was, we saw that.
Yes.
What people miss was that the real story of Steve was the hero's journey.
And the growth.
He's cast out of his kingdom. He's wandering around. He makes some big mistakes, both with Next and with Pixar. But because of those mistakes, this is about 25 years ago, he changed, I would say changed dramatically. He also got married and had kids. He had all those things that came with growth. Incredibly smart. After he changed, nobody who was with him left for the next, all those years until he died. So basically, those people were not going to psychoanalyze Steve. So that part of the story wasn't told. And it's because nobody would talk about him because he was still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we knew he was sick. And it was,
Yeah.
So the reason I tell the story is that a lot of people think that the Steve who behaved that way built this transformative Apple. That's not what happened. That Steve was kicked out and he wandered around and learned a lot of lessons, and he came back as a new person. And the transformed Steve, the Steve who had learned so many lessons, who had learned empathy, came back. He's the person that built the new Apple. That's the real story.
Well, and speaking of building organizations, I wanted to ask you for another insight. If I think about the entertainment industry, particularly the movie industry, if we go back in time 70, 80 years, there used to be something called the studio system, where MGM or one of these grand studios had directors under contract, had actors under contract, the crew, even the movie theaters themselves were owned and operated by the movie studios, so they could actually distribute their pictures to their studios. So it was a deeply vertically integrated process from start to finish, from the initial inception of the movie to the final display to the consumer. And then in more recent times, Hollywood went through this incredible fragmentation where every movie project is a different company. And everybody has an agent. And it's a spot market, each and every project, each and every time. But when you and Pixar really finally did figure out how to make wonderful animated movies, you didn't follow the Hollywood system. Can you talk a little bit about when vertical integration really helps versus when this more open model where everybody's got their own agent, when that might make sense?
Yes, it's an interesting arc through that. If you separate out the creative process from the business model, they followed different paths. So the business model was originally you made money off of tickets. And if you had this vertically integrated system, then you would control the cost of making the films and the number out there, and you got the money from the tickets. Then that system broke down sort of with a revolt of the artists, and it broke up into expertise spread out largely in the LA area.
Yes.
As you know, all these independent people with agents, but no consistent group. And the studios turned into marketers and distributors and banks. They were funders.
Banks, yes.
Okay.
Even special effects. Special effects were one of those outsourced capabilities that you would hire a group of experts to do.
So this then became this sort of technical underpinning as it went through the business model change. Now, part of this was television came along. So with television, the business model changed. And it went from selling time for advertisements. Now, you still have the theaters where they're selling tickets. Now you've got television where you make the money with the advertisements. Then you go through the next transition where you've got initially VHS and DVD. We make money selling those. And you start to have the cable systems.
Yes.
Where they're bundling. So the business model is now fighting over the share of the bundle, and people are paying for a monthly fee to use that. Then, so that's the new business model. Then the next business model comes along, and it's streaming. So now you're paying a subscription for streaming, and you're probably willing to pay for 2 to 5 subscriptions, and that's about it. So, it's what you're going to get. So, in order to renew a subscription, then you have to produce new content. All right. So, at every one of these times, you've got these companies who are battling over the money. So that's the business model which is evolving. Now let's look at the creative model. The creative model is you produce a fair number of films, and it's like a portfolio, and you hope that one intent is big and it pays for everything else.
It's a hit-driven.
It's a hit-driven business,
Yeah.
and it's not unlike what you see with VCs or startup companies.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. You hope a third of them at least break even, and you hope 1 in 10 is a gigantic hit. They were doing the same thing. Now you move on to television. Same thing. It's the same creative model. You produce a lot of stuff. You hope a few hit it, and that's where you make your money. And now we're in the streaming. It's the same damn creative model.
Mm-hmm.
It's just television. You're producing a lot of stuff. A lot of it's crap. You hope that a few catch on, and that's what's going to pay the bills. So the interesting thing about the creative model, though, is you've kind of got 2 different ways of thinking about it. There's the one I just described, where you make a lot of stuff. And the other one is you put all your eggs in one basket and you pay a lot of attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was our model. Now, looking at the way that live action worked, and the live action was also working under this dangerous illusion, but because they weren't thinking about the business, they didn't see the illusion. And I'll come to the illusion in a minute. But since they were playing that game of producing a lot of things, they actually couldn't pay attention to all of them. So our model was, we have to pay attention to everything, which means that we have to have everybody feel ownership in it. It would be cheaper for us to make the films by outsourcing it. No question about it. We're not the cheapest producer, but everybody owns the making of this, all the way to the kitchen staff who are Pixar employees. Right? Everybody gets credit in the films. And we have started, well, after I retired, we'd produced 21 films. We'd started 22. So there was only 1 film that we didn't complete, and the other 21s we did, because we put everything into it, and we wanted everybody to stay there.
And if I may say, the Pixar films are uniformly wonderful and marvelous. You talked about the hit-driven business, which means there are going to be some hits, but there'll be a lot of misses. And honestly, the overall quality is quite variable. And I think as a parent of 2 children, I've seen lots of Pixar films, and I've seen many of them many times. They stand up beautifully, and they are just wonderful contributions to the world. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Well, we went into Disney in 2006, and at that time, a great deal of talent was under contract, because that was sort of the mindset, the contract mindset. And so one of the first things to do was actually to dismantle the contract system.
Yes.
And there's a reason for it. And the reason is, if you've got somebody under contract, then you don't have to worry about them until the contract is up, at which point you negotiate with them. And our view was that whole system was put in place to not protect the employees, it was to protect the studios.
Mm-hmm.
These were one-way contracts.
Yes.
So, and I don't like illusions, right? So these are people with families, and everything about where they're picked, their opportunities has got to be based upon their passion and what they want to do. So we said, okay, the way this is going to work is we're just shutting down the contract system, and if you've got a problem, I want to know about it now. Now, they're adults. We can't fix every problem. We can't make everybody happy, but they know that they're going to be listened to. And if we listen to them, they can respect that. And it's really important. So that was basically, I think the protection was to not have the contracts. Now, so now if we go to the grand illusion of live action. The studios, because I've been with them a long time, they kept saying, you got all these technology guys, and there's nobody that's technical in the film industry, except for the special effects world and animation. But the rest come out of a different world. So what they believed was that the fundamental barrier to entry into this business was that of making films, is the technical companies did not know how to make films. Now the reason this was an illusion was that the studios didn't make the films either.
Yes, yes.
Right? All that
they
the
were
filmmakers
the banks
wanted
and the
was
backers.
the check.
Yes.
So the barrier to entry was the check for making a film, and you knew who the filmmakers were, and they knew how to put together a team. And so, okay, boom, you're in the business. Now, on the technical side, they say the barrier to entry is, okay, how do you get on the technology side? The truth is now, you can write a check and put together a streaming service. The barrier to entry on both sides is an illusion. It's basically a check to get it going.
Well, and another part of your answer I really appreciate is this interplay between the technological opportunities and the business model development that open new horizons or new possibilities, but maybe also close off some other areas that just aren't so useful.
Well, it's one of the things I believed early on was this was not a technical play. And one of the things I was really proud of was when the Toy Story came out. This is the first computer animated movie. And we read the reviews, of course. It's the first one, they're going to read every single review. In almost every review, there were only one or two lines saying it was generated using a computer.
Yes.
And the rest
Yes.
was about the movie. And what I like about that was that all of the technical people at Pixar took incredible pride in that. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to make a difference. And it wasn't about wowing people with technology. It was about telling the kind of stories that were going to last for years and years and years. And they understood it and still do.
Let me close with taking us back to where we began. In the 1970s, the University of Utah was a real hotspot for computer graphics. Where do you see the hotspots today that are going to give rise to the things that our children and grandchildren will be thrilled by in decades to come?
Well, it's clear in terms of hotspots that the rapid growth in a number of areas are generating new opportunities. And so in the case of computer graphics, for instance, computer graphics generate ideas. NVIDIA, among others, among probably the best, made chips. Chips sold into the game industry, which funded this. Those chips went back into entertainment and academia for new ideas. And you had this cycle.
And artificial intelligence neural networks as
yes,
well.
it reached the point where, because of the graphics, games, NVIDIA market, where they had so much processing power, that it restarted something which had been conceived
Yes.
years ago, which
Yes.
is neural networks. But they ran out of room because they have compute power. Suddenly there's all this compute power. Let's start again. So now you've got the neural networks starting this field, and it isn't just the deep neural networks, it's all different kinds of the ways of thinking and recognizing that's coming like a freight train. I can't predict exactly where it's going, just like I couldn't have predicted a lot of things years ago. The chips are still going to get a lot faster, and that's going to open up more doors. the sensors for the sensing in our world are going to get much better and cheaper in terms of tracking things. It also opens to danger, something we were naive about. When the internet first started to come out and be called the internet, the promises and the excitement of it were very positive.
Yes.
So here we are years later, and sure enough, we've achieved those positive things. We've also uncovered a negative effect because of really bad actors, of insecurities in the system, of monetization and privacy. We didn't predict those when the internet first came out. So now you look at those other things that are coming, what are their impact on people's lives, on manufacturing, on keeping track of things, the positive quality of life, or the dangers that come along with it. So I know they're coming, so it's like a bunch of freight trains are coming, and you can't ignore them. They're not going away. So how do we have like moral, ethical people intently engaged in this process so that it actually is better for everybody rather than for the few?
Ed, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.